If two people quietly split years ago, why did one moment on live TV blow everything up? And why are whispers of a final split getting louder now? Tonight, we're unpacking the full arc, the polished forever image, the word that rewired their brand, the 3 minutes that divided the world, the book that reset the timeline, the new chapter he's writing, the money stakes if legal paperwork ever hits the table, and the PR choices that pushed public sympathy in opposite directions. And there's one detail that explains it all. A pre-wedding decision that set the rules for everything that followed. I'll show you what that decision was and why it's the key to understanding the ending everyone's talking about. Before the headlines, there was a picture that felt bulletproof. A power couple so synchronized that people started using their names as a shorthand for staying together through anything. Red carpets looked effortless. Family moments felt aspirational. The message was simple. This isn't a fling. This is a fortress. But even fortresses have blueprints the public never sees. Very early, they framed their union as more than a standard marriage. Life partnership. 2 words that sounded spiritual and permanent, like a vow that could outlast bad seasons and human mistakes. Fans heard poetry. Insiders heard policy. Here's the curiosity you'll want to keep in your back pocket as we go. Before the wedding, there was a private promise that would end up controlling almost every decision afterward. It wasn't about romance, it was about rules. A line drawn so firmly that years later, it would make scandal look survivable and heartbreak look negotiable. We'll name that promise and show you how it changed the endgame when we get to the final section. For now, remember the mood of those early years. 2 stars building a brand that meant unbreakable, even if unhappy, sometimes lived in the same house. Because once the public believes in your fairy tale, the stakes of telling the truth get higher. And in 2020, one word forced the truth into the room. But that wasn't the whole story. Entanglement, one word, and suddenly the polished photo started flickering. It wasn't just the reveal, it was how it landed. People saw a marriage that wasn't behaving like a marriage, and roles that didn't look equal. He looked exposed. She looked composed. Sympathy tilted. Memes multiplied. And the internet did what it always does. Decided who was the hero and who was the villain inside a relationship none of us lived in. Underneath the noise was something more complicated. They had already softened the language of marriage into "we're family." We ride for each other, life partners. That framing makes room for survival. It doesn't always make room for closeness. When boundaries blur, the public becomes the referee. And once the public is officiating, real intimacy is the first casualty. The entanglement taught them and us an expensive lesson. The moment you narrate your private rules out loud, people will apply their own rules to you. Forgiveness, loyalty, pride, pain. All of it gets graded in real time by millions of strangers. If you're not perfectly aligned, one of you will win the narrative and the other will wear the bruise. Still, you could feel the pair trying to keep the family-first umbrella open, until the night that umbrella flipped inside out, and what happened next would shock everyone. A joke, a cutaway, a look, a walk, a slap. 3 minutes that will live in every pop culture recap for the next 50 years. The reaction was instant and punishing. Apology video, projects paused, deals reconsidered. A reputation that once felt invincible suddenly looked very human. But the true damage wasn't only about the act, it was about the aftermath, where one partner moved into repair mode, owning, apologizing, recalibrating. People felt the other partner step back. The message wasn't a roar of solidarity, it was distance. Later comments reframed the relationship status at the time. The public parsed the timing, the tone, the words. If he acted like a husband and she described them as not being together, who exactly was he defending? That gap in narrative, his protectiveness, her perspective, became the fault line under everything else. Audiences don't just react to events, they react to alignment. When alignment is missing, empathy fragments. For many, the Oscars weren't only a blow to his image, they were a magnifying glass on theirs. And just when the world assumed the couple was rebuilding behind closed doors, a new chapter hit shelves and rearranged the timeline. But that wasn't the whole story. The memoir arrived with calm sentences and explosive implications. The claim that they'd been emotionally split since 2016 reframed years of headlines. Suddenly, the entanglement wasn't a glitch. The Oscars weren't a strategic defense of a normal marriage. The life partnership language wasn't poetic code. It was a map. Fans asked the only question that made sense. If the separation was that old, why did the rest of it look so recent? And if they hadn't been functioning as a traditional couple for years, who was responsible for clearing up the public confusion? The answer, as always, depended on where you stood. Some felt the honesty was overdue. Others felt it arrived just in time to protect one brand from another's mess. Either way, the reset was complete. The public no longer viewed them as a couple struggling to reconnect. They saw 2 adults co-parenting, collaborating, and occasionally colliding in the open. And in the middle of that shift, he started writing a new chapter, one with music, momentum, and a different energy than the man we met on that stage. Next, what a reboot looks like when you refuse to play small. When a story needs oxygen, movement helps. He gave himself movement, street performances that felt like a reset. A new album that sounded like a confession and a celebration at once. Conversations that were less about image and more about appetite for life after a decade of emotional triage. There were photographs and clips that sparked chatter about a new woman around him, appearances and chemistry the internet read as romantic. We'll keep it where it belongs, rumor talk and social interpretation. What mattered wasn't the label, it was the signal. He looked present, light, unapologetically forward-leaning. That doesn't erase the past. It does suggest he isn't interested in living there. And that's where the narrative pivoted from can they fix it to should they? When a long relationship turns into a long separation, happiness stops being a joint project and becomes a personal obligation. If you look freer outside the frame than inside it, the frame starts to feel like the problem. But personal freedom and public endings don't always arrive together. There's a reason powerful couples move slowly when lawyers get involved. The reason is math, and this is where the whispers get loud. Love is personal. Divorce is logistics. And online, the speculation got specific. Talk of no prenuptial agreement, talk of long entangled assets, talk of how a formal split would require more than hard feelings. It would require forensic patience. We're not declaring any of that as settled fact. We're naming the conversation the audience is already having. If even part of that chatter is accurate, a slow walk would make strategic sense. There's brand equity to consider, catalog revenue, partnerships, real estate, future upside. There's also family legacy, which is its own kind of currency. No one wants to see years of work reduced to a shouting match over spreadsheets, which is why silence often replaces statements. Silence isn't only mystery, sometimes it's a legal tactic. Every sentence in public can become a sentence in discovery. Every post can become an exhibit. That's not romance, that's risk management. But while the legal speculation hums, another layer matters just as much as money: public sympathy. In any high-profile split, the person the audience roots for usually spends less capital restoring their image later. And the way you earn that sympathy isn't with explanations, it's with choices. Which brings us to the game both of them know intimately. PR, chess, 2 strategies, 2 outcomes. He leaned into accountability and connection, apologies, gratitude, and artists returned to the basics. She leaned into candor and authorship. Her book, her voice, her truth. Both approaches can work. Together, they collided. Here's why. Audiences are generous until they feel someone is standing alone. When he looked like a man carrying the weight for 2. Empathy attached to his posture. When she looked like a woman stepping back from his worst moment and then revealing a multi-year separation, empathy split. Not because candor is wrong, but because timing is a storyteller. If support isn't visible when a partner is spiraling, people remember the absence louder than the next explanation. That dynamic spilled into their professional worlds. His "I'm rebuilding" energy earned him room to try again. Her "I'm rewriting" energy earned her a new conversation, but not always a friendly one. Neither is completely fair. Both are completely predictable. Mipatser is arithmetic. Visibility plus tone divided by timing equals public sentiment. Which brings us back to the curiosity we planted in section 1. What was the private rule that defined the past and points to the ending? It's the same choice that made their brand durable and their marriage fragile. You've heard versions of it. Tonight we spell it out, and this time we'll answer it plainly. Here it is, the decision that quietly wrote the script. A pre-wedding vow that divorce wasn't an option, a never, said with conviction, and the widely discussed notion that they didn't set up a prenuptial agreement when they married. One part emotional, one part practical. Together they created a contract inside the marriage and a complication outside it. That vow turned "we're in this forever" into policy. Policy can protect, it can also trap. When you believe you cannot leave, you don't solve problems, you manage them. You don't say, "this doesn't work." You say, "this is ours to carry." The life partnership phrasing flowed right out of that mindset. It was a way to promise permanence even as the shape of the relationship changed. Meanwhile, the no prenup whispers, again widely discussed online, not confirmed here, did something else. They raised the cost of ending the story cleanly. The longer you build together, the harder it is to separate fairly. That makes every public move feel like a negotiation, even when no papers have been filed. Put those 2 pieces together, divorce never and divorce complicated, and the last decade makes more sense. Why protect the brand? Why keep the "we're family" umbrella open? Why does every crisis end with a posture of endurance rather than a plan for reinvention? Because the rule said endurance was the goal. Not happiness, not intimacy, endurance. So what changes now? Kids grow up, careers stabilize, the audience learns more than you ever planned to share. And 2 adults who have already lived apart in practice finally ask the question out loud. Is permanence without peace actually love, or just loyalty to an old promise? That's the crossroads. And for the first time, they both look ready to choose something different. From myth to memoir, from a single word to a single night. This story isn't a collapse, it's a confession. The image said, forever. The timeline said, since 2016. He's found motion again. She's claimed authorship. If a formal split arrives, it won't be a shock twist. It'll be the paperwork that matches the life they've already been living. And if it doesn't, the choice will say something just as loud, that two people can outgrow a marriage and still protect a family. Either way, the pre-wedding rule finally served its purpose. It kept them through the storm. Now they get to decide if keeping each other is the same thing as keeping themselves.